An ancient Jewish apocalypse gives human history 10 bounded periods. The first section looks backward through Enoch, the flood, Abraham, Sinai, the temple, and exile. Then the timeline turns forward. A sword, a permanent house, a world marked for destruction, and a final judgment appear in a fixed order. But before those scenes begins a quieter sign. Sevenfold instruction concerning creation. This is the apocalypse of weeks, and the manuscript order matters more than most readers realize. This text contains one of the most structured timelines of human history found in an ancient Jewish apocalypse, and its architecture is rarely explained outside specialist study. Here is what I'm going to argue in this video, and I want to say it plainly so you can decide now whether the argument interests you. The apocalypse of weeks found in 1 Enoch chapters 93 and 91 is a sequential timeline that divides all of history into 10 bounded periods. The first 6 describe the biblical past as the author and community understood it. The 7th describes a transition generation, and periods 8 through 10 describe the end of the world, itemized in order with structural markers between each phase. Most scholars treat the forward-looking section as generic apocalyptic hope. I'm going to argue that it is more specific than that, that the transition markers in period 7 are checkable, and that the text identifies a sign, one particular development that falls between the current age and the next. That is an interpretation, not a sentence stated by the text itself. Interested in following ancient texts back to the manuscripts, subscribe to this channel. In this investigation, and I will mark every place where I leave the text behind and start reasoning on my own. The passage is preserved in 2 pieces, and that matters more than it may sound. First, Enoch chapter 93 verses 1 through 10 holds weeks 1 through 7. Chapter 91 verses 12 through 17 holds weeks 8 through 10. In the Ethiopic manuscripts, the only complete witnesses to 1 Enoch, chapter 91, comes before chapter 93. A reader following that arrangement encounters the ending before the beginning. The destruction showed up before the backstory. Imagine reading a manual where pages 8 through 10 were bound before pages 1 through 7. You could still read every word, you just couldn't follow the sequence. Here is where that fragment comes in for Q212. It is an Aramaic manuscript pulled from Cave 4 at Qumran, the same site that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yosef Milik published it in 1976 in his book on the Aramaic fragments of Enoch. Milik's edition is dense, technical, and was controversial at the time for reasons unrelated to this passage. But the part that matters here is straightforward. In 4Q212, the weeks appear in numerical order, 1 through 10 in sequence, no displacement. At some point in the transmission of the Ethiopic text, these sections were displaced. George Nicholsberg, in his Hermeneia commentary from 2001, treats 4Q212 as the corrective. So does James Vanderkam. Modern critical editions therefore restore the sequence as chapter 93, verses 1 through 10, followed by chapter 91, verses 12 through 17. 10 periods, 10 ages sequential. The order matters because in the correct arrangement, every week is a consequence of the week before it. The architecture is causal. Week 2 doesn't just follow week 1. It follows from it. Wickedness grows, and the flood responds. The whole timeline works this way, and when you read it out of order, you miss the logic and just get a list of events. The Bodleian Library in Oxford preserves important Ethiopian Enoch manuscripts associated with James Bruce, who returned to Europe from Ethiopia in 1773 with 3 copies. Their survival helped return the complete work to modern scholarly study. If your church or tradition ever taught you a framework for ages or weeks in prophecy, I want to hear what system they used. Leave that framework in the comments. And the range of frameworks people bring is wider than anything in the academic literature. Now follow the 10-week map. Week 1, Enoch is born. Righteousness still holds in the world. The text doesn't romanticize this. It is just the starting position. Week 2, wickedness grows, and the flood comes at the end of the period. The author compresses the entire pre-flood era into one sentence. Everything between Adam and Noah fits inside a single age, defined not by what happened during it, but by what ended it. Week 3, a man is chosen. The text calls him the plant of righteous judgment. Charles Nicolsburg and Isaac all identify him as Abraham. The lineage starts. Week 4, visions of the holy and the righteous. A law given for all generations. An enclosure made. This is Sinai, the tabernacle. The author does not name Moses. He names the law and the structure. Week 5, a house of glory and sovereignty is built. Solomon's temple. Again, no king named, only the building. Weeks 1 through 5 are commonly mapped onto familiar biblical history. Major commentators broadly identify week 5 with the first temple, even while details of the scheme remain open to interpretation. Week 6 is where I want you to pay closer attention. The people living in that house are blinded. A man ascends, the house is burned, the chosen root is scattered. Erash. Charles reads the ascending man as Elijah. The burned house is the destruction of the first temple by Babylon. The scattering is the exile. 3 centuries compressed into 3 verbs: blinded, burned, scattered. And the text moves on like it is reading from a ledger. I want to know whether you think this author was writing down events he already knew about or events he was given. Because the answer determines how you read everything that comes after week 6, and I'm genuinely not settled on it myself. I keep landing on one side and then sliding back. Those broad identifications are standard in scholarship. What follows is more debated. Week 7, an apostate generation arises. Nicolsburg dates the composition of the apocalypse of weeks to around 170 to 160 BC, the early Maccabean period. If he is right, and most scholars think he is, then week 7 is the author's own era. The Hellenistic crisis, the desecration under Antiochus IV. The text says this generation's deeds are many and all of them are apostate. But then the text adds something at the close of week 7 that scholars tend to summarize without dwelling on. At the end of the apostate generation, the elect righteous of the eternal plan of righteousness are chosen, and they are given sevenfold instruction concerning the whole of creation. Sevenfold instruction concerning the whole of creation. I want to sit in that sentence for a moment. Charles translates it sevenfold instruction concerning all his creation. Nicolsburg has sevenfold teaching about his entire creation. Ephraim Isaac in 1983 writes sevenfold doctrine concerning the whole creation. The word sevenfold is stable across every major English edition. Whatever this instruction is, the text treats it as total and unprecedented. It is not described as partial. The phrase reaches, in the text's own wording, toward the whole of creation. This distinction helped you separate the manuscript from the myth, share the investigation with them. Now here is where I leave the scholarship behind, and I want to be clear about the boundary. I'm going to argue with the standard reading of week 7, not because Nicolsburg is wrong. His dating is almost certainly correct. The author was writing in the Maccabean period, and week 7 describes his own generation. But the standard reading stops at the historical identification. It says week 7 equals the Hellenistic crisis, and weeks 8 through 10 are the author's hope for vindication. Standard apocalyptic. No different from a dozen other Second Temple texts promising that the righteous win in the end. I don't think weeks 8 through 10 are generic, and here is why I can't let go of it. The structural markers are too specific. Most apocalyptic texts say the wicked will be punished. This text says when in the sequence the punishment falls, what precedes it, what follows it, and what the world looks like after. It itemizes That is inference. That is me, not the text. The text just lists items. I am the one saying the list is a checkable sequence. Take it accordingly. The next 3 weeks are the section I rewrote several times trying to find a version that was honest without being either too hot or too flat. What I settled on is the plainest read I can give you that still contains what the passage says. Week 8. Charles translates. A sword shall be given to the righteous, that a righteous judgment may be executed on the oppressors, and sinners shall be delivered into the hands of the righteous. The image is unmistakably violent, whether the sword is read literally or symbolically. The action is judgment. The text identifies who receives the sword and who receives the judgment. Then at the close of week 8, houses are acquired through righteousness, and a house is built for the great king in glory forever. A second house. The first house burned in week 6. This one is built for the great king, and the text says it stands in perpetuity. The interval between the two houses is 3 weeks. The first temple appears in week 5. It burns in week 6. The replacement appears in week 8. The earlier intervals map onto periods that interpreters readily identify. Adam to the flood, Abraham to Sinai, and Sinai to the temple. The house in week 8, however, is presented as an enduring eschatological house rather than simply another entry in ordinary history. 10. I said that number at the beginning, and it sounded like nothing. It is not nothing. The author does not say many ages. He does not say in the fullness of time. He says 10, and he fills each one. Week 9. Nicholsburg translates the righteous judgment shall be revealed to the whole world. Every deed of the sinners departs from the earth. And then this line, the world shall be written down for destruction. Charles has it too. So does Isaac. The verb is written or inscribed. I keep going back and forth on whether written or inscribed is the better English for what the Guizi is doing. Because Guizi is a Semitic language, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian church, and its verb forms carry weight that English flattens. But either way, the action is administrative. The world is registered for demolition the way a condemned property gets filed with the city, not destroyed yet, cataloged. There's a gap between the sentence and the execution, and the text puts that gap on the record. The rhetoric of the epistle treats judgment as a sequence rather than an unannounced explosion. The verdict is revealed, the world is inscribed for destruction, and execution follows. If anyone has Michael Nibb's translation of 91:14, the Oxford edition from 1978, and it renders that verb differently than written or inscribed. I genuinely want to see it. I have work from Charles, Nicholsburg, and Isaac. A fourth rendering that breaks the pattern would change something. Week 10, the eternal judgment on the watchers. Nicholsburg notes this is the only period that opens into what the text itself calls weeks without number in goodness and righteousness. The 10th week is the last bounded age. After it, time changes character entirely from counted to uncounted. I need to give you the strongest argument against everything I just said because it is a real argument and it deserves a fair hearing. The position associated with John J. Collins and broadly shared by Nicholsburg and much of the field is that the entire apocalypse of weeks is vaticinium ex even 2. Prophecy after the fact. The author, writing around 165 BC, knew about weeks 1 through 6 because they had already happened. Week 7 is his present. Weeks 8 through 10 are conventional apocalyptic projection, no more specific than any other Second Temple text that says God wins and the wicked lose. The forward section in this reading contains no falsifiable information. I can't fully answer that, and I'm not going to pretend I can. I haven't found a way to prove the forward section is predictive rather than aspirational, and I don't think anyone can from the text alone. Here's what I can say. The forward weeks contain structural specifics that most apocalyptic literature does not. A sword given to one particular group, a house built that does not burn, a world inscribed for destruction before destruction occurs with a gap between the inscription and the execution, an explicit terminal period followed by a stated transition from bounded time to unbounded time. The specificity is unusual, whether unusual means genuine foreknowledge or just a more careful writer. The text does not tell me, and I'm not going to fill that gap with an answer I made up. If you think the week 7 markers are too vague to check against anything real, tell me where I'm overreading. I mean that. This is the weakest joint in the argument, and I know it. If you're still here, you now know more about the internal timeline of 1st Enoch than almost anyone you will talk to this week. That is not flattery. The apocalypse of weeks is almost never taught, even in seminaries that cover Second Temple literature. The same end-time sequence appears in a completely different literary form 20 chapters earlier. Chapters 85 through 90 contain the animal apocalypse, which retells all of human history using animal figures. Adam is a white bull. The patriarchs are bulls of various colors. Israel becomes sheep. The nations that oppress them are wild animals, predators, scavengers. This is not sophisticated allegory. The original audience would have read it immediately the same way you read a political cartoon. The animal apocalypse runs 6 chapters, and it ends at the same place the apocalypse of weeks ends. A great judgment, the destruction of the old house, the construction of a new and greater house, and then something strange. A white bull appears, and all the other animals are transformed to resemble it. Nickelsburg and Vanderkam both note the structural parallel to the apocalypse of weeks. 2 completely different literary forms composed within roughly the same period arriving at the same terminal sequence. Judgment, destruction of the old structure, construction of the permanent one, transformation. Daniel C. Olson and Gabriele Boccaccini have both argued that this doubling suggests a shared tradition older than either passage. The astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82, is the oldest section of 1st Enoch, probably 3rd century BC. The epistle section containing the apocalypse of weeks dates to around 170 BC. The animal apocalypse is roughly contemporary with the epistle. 2 independently composed sections using different formats arrive at the same endpoint. Boccaccini's position is that the underlying framework, the schedule itself, may predate both texts, and that what we are reading in the apocalypse of weeks and the animal apocalypse are 2 different writers drawing on the same inherited sequence of events that their community already accepted as given. If you have read both passages back to back, the apocalypse of weeks and the animal apocalypse, I want to know whether the parallel hit you the way it hit me. I read Enoch for over a year before someone pointed out the structural match, and it made me feel like I'd been reading the book with one eye closed. If you want more careful investigations into the texts that shaped the ancient biblical world, subscribe to this channel. The title of this video says there is a sign. I owe you that. Week 7 ends with 2 markers. First, total apostasy, then the election of the righteous who receive sevenfold instruction about all of creation. The text does not say these happen at the same time. It says one follows the other. Apostasy is the background condition, is the weather of the entire 7th age. The thing that signals the transition from week 7 to week 8 is the instruction. Here is my read, and I'm marking it as mine. I think the sign inside the logic of this text is the sevenfold teaching. Not the apostasy, because apostasy is the permanent state of the age. It's the baseline, not the signal. The signal is when a specific group receives knowledge described as total, complete, covering all of creation. That is what the text places at the hinge between the current age and the age of the sword. Whether that has happened, or is happening, or hasn't started, I do not know. I have no read on it that I trust. And I would rather say that than hand you a tidy answer I built for the end of a video. The Apocalypse of Weeks sits in 2 chapters of a book that was not included in most later Christian canons. Athanasius' 39th festal letter in 367 did not list 1st Enoch among the canonical books. The Council of Laodicea is also often cited in discussions of 4th century canon lists, although the textual history of its final canon is debated. The Aramaic original survives in fragments in a climate-controlled facility. The complete text survived in Ethiopia because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church never took it off the list. The sequence it describes has 10 entries. The first 6 track the biblical past as the author understood it. The 7th describes a transition. The last 3 describe an end. The text is public. It is translated. Almost nobody reads it. The text remains whether or not a reader accepts its message. In the comments, tell us, which part of the evidence matters most to you?